Welcome to this demo of SAP's new Islands or Flash Islands technology. What we're going to show you here today is a little demo of how you can build a Flex component and use it inside a Dynpro ABAP application. This is using the technology that we are calling Flash Islands. The whole idea is that you can take existing Flex and Flash-based controls and seamlessly integrate them into your Dynpro application without the Dynpro programmer having to know anything about Flex or ActionScript, and have this very nice level of interaction between the two areas, between the Flex area and the Dynpro HTML area, with data and events going back and forth between the two areas. So what I want to show you today, I want to show you the whole process. I'm going to start by launching the Netweaver Developer Studio and using the Flex Builder to build a component and add in some of the specific logic to that the component needs to run inside the Islands framework. And then I'll import that into my ABAP system and build a Dynpro component that uses that. I'll keep it pretty simple. I'm going to have some table data, and then I'm just going to show a chart. But really, you're not restricted to simple examples. Your your Flex component could be quite complex. In fact, that's really the whole purpose, is to be able to provide UI components that aren't possible to achieve with regular HTML and JavaScript. These very specialized, highly interactive areas of user interface that Flex is so good for. So, with that, I'll bring down the slide deck and start launching the Netweaver Developer Studio. Alright, in order to get started with my development, I've launched the Netweaver Developer Studio. Now, you may already be familiar with this tool. I am actually running the Netweaver CE 7.1 Enhancement Package 1 version of the Netweaver Developer Studio. Now, one of the nice things about the Netweaver Developer Studio is that it is based upon Eclipse. The Eclipse IDE is sitting there underneath the Netweaver Developer Studio, and that often means that plugins and other tools that are designed to run inside of Eclipse or on top of Eclipse work just fine inside the Netweaver Developer Studio as well. And that's really leads us to where I'm going to be doing my work today. Now, when you build Flex components, you use a tool called Adobe Flex Builder, and I've got version 3 installed on my machine here. Now, this is a tool that you would purchase separately from Adobe. It doesn't come built into the Netweaver Developer Studio, but what I've done is I've taken my Flex Builder 3 installation and I've installed it into my Netweaver Developer Studio. Now, you can run Flex Builder 3 standalone. You can run it on another installation of Eclipse. So if you didn't want to merge it into your Netweaver Developer Studio, you could also do another side-by-side installation of Eclipse and then install Flex Builder into it. But I've chosen to install it into my Netweaver Developer Studio, and it's kind of nice because then I can move back and forth between different types of SAP development, like doing Visual Composer, and when I'm done with that, I can say, no, I'm going to switch over and do Flex development instead. And that brings up my Flex perspective. Now that we're in the Flex perspective, the Flex Builder perspective of Eclipse or the Netweaver Developer Studio, we're ready to go ahead and start creating a new Flex project. I can give this really whatever name I want here. Let's say Islands Intro 1, and I'll go ahead and save it to my default location. We do want to be sure and set the application type to web application, so it runs in a Flash player. I'll go ahead and output it to bin debug. Now at this point we can go ahead and adjust the library paths. What we want to do here is most of the programming of a Flash Island based component is no different than normal Flex based component development. But obviously we need functionality to talk to Dynpro, to pass data back and forth, to throw events, and all that coding is supplied by an SAP library. And what we'll see when we get into the coding is that the Flex developer only has to link that library in at the point that we're at now, and then call a few extra methods of that library, and really that library will do most of the work for the developer of doing this integration. Now you might be wondering where you can get this library at. I'm going to bring up the ABAP workbench. All right, these libraries are stored on the ABAP server in the MIME repository. So if you want to get access to them, you go to SE80, the ABAP development workbench. You switch to the MIME repository view, and then you drill down into the MIME repository. They're under public, BC for basis, UR for unified renderer, NW7, Netweaver 7, and then the Flash Islands directory. You'll notice here that we have quite a few files. First of all, we have the ones that end in SWF and all have IMPL on the end. These are the runtime libraries, so you really never have to mess with these. They'll be linked into your application dynamically at runtime. What this allows SAP to do is put most of the functionality in them so that they're shared across all of your components, and we don't have the size of the component doesn't have to be as large then. But the other thing that it allows us to do is make changes, bug fixes over time, and then ship those changes to you via the MIME repository, and then all your components would pick up those changes automatically because they're linking to this file at runtime. That way you don't have to go back and recompile necessarily because we introduced a bug fix. Now, what you need to be concerned with as a component developer is this SWC library, so this Flex component. This is what we're going to link into our project, and notice that we have 4 versions here. First of all, the ones without a numeric prefix in them are the 2.0 version. So for Flex Builder 2.0, the ones with a number are for Flex Builder 3. And then we've got debug versions of each of the libraries. So I'm going to build a Flex 3 component today, so I'm going to want this WD Islands library 3.0. I can just go ahead and download this to my local machine. And I'll save this in my documents so I have easy access to it later. It's downloaded. Now I can return to my Flex project and I can say I want to add a library to this project. I just browse and I find that SWC file that I downloaded from the ABAP server, and it is linked in. Now if you forget to do this, you could always come back into the project properties and you get this exact same screen later. So it's building out the project, and when it comes up, we'll have a nice empty Flex project ready for us to do our coding. Alright, one quick note before I get into the coding of my component. You saw earlier how when I looked up the SWC libraries, there was a Flex Builder 2 version, there was a Flex Builder 3 version of the library. Originally, SAP only delivered the Flex Builder 2 version, and if you're a ramp-up customer viewing this e-learning very soon after it was published, you might only have the Flex2 library when you go look in the MIME repository. That's not really a huge problem, even though we're running FlexBuilder 3. What you would need to do is go into your project properties and go to the compiler, and it's nice in FlexBuilder you can say use a specific SDK, so basically you can compile for Flex2 instead of Flex 3, and then you have no problems, no conflicts with using the Flex 2 Island library. But I have the Flex 3 Island library, so I'll go ahead and leave this at Flex 3, and we're ready to start our coding. Now, if you are familiar with FlexBuilder, I'll run through it pretty quick here. Basically, I have my navigator of all of my projects. My current one that's open is the Islands Intro 1. You can see all of your files. We'll look more at this Island Mxml here in a second, but that's going to be the main part of this project. We have all our UI elements. You can drag and drop them onto the WYSIWYG canvas if you wanted to. You see there, and then you would have properties that you can fill in, but you can also switch into a source view, and then you can manipulate the underlying Mxml directly. And that's what we're going to be coding in. If you are familiar with Flex development, it's a mixture of Mxml for designing the layout of the screen, and ActionScript as the scripting language. And we'll use a combination of both of those here as we use some ActionScript to communicate with the Flash Islands library from the SWC that we linked into the project, and then we'll use some Mxml to design what we want on the screen. And what we're going to be building is a very simple little chart. Not the most complex example, but one that will let us, start very basic and really just focus on how do we make it an island, how do we move some basic data in from WebDynpro into the island. Later in some of the further e-learning examples that we'll publish, we'll have more complex lessons where we work with eventing and bidirectional push of the data, but for now we're going to start with our very simple chart and graph. Okay, my Mxml application tag has some settings that affect the entire application. And I'm going to want to make just a couple of changes here. First of all, the layouting, the flow of the components, the UI elements on the page. Instead of it being absolute, I want to use a vertical flow control. Next, let's see. I just want to control the width and the height. And basically what I'm saying, I want the component to fill whatever area that it's in. This is fairly typical when building an island or something designed to be a UI widget or a control on the screen. I'm going to be able to specify the actual size in WebDynpro of the container for the island, and then all the UI elements inside my Flex component will expand to fill that, because I'm just going to take 100% width and height of the container that I give it from WebDynpro, not necessarily 100% of the entire screen. Now, this is going to be important. I say initialize. So basically I'm saying for the event, for the initialize event, I want to trigger a little action script function, and we'll get to coding that function in a second. But basically what I'm doing here is I'm putting a hook in so that when the component is initialized, I can also do the initialization of the islands framework, and you'll see that in a second when I code this init app. But before I do that, I want to do just a little more housekeeping. Basically, I want to set the background color. F1, F6, putting in the background color and the background gradient color, no, my gradient alphas. I want that to be 1.0, 1.0. And you can see this already at design time. Basically, now it's like this light, very light blue color, and I did that so that it would match the standard background color in Dynpro rather than the deeper gray. You don't have to do anything like that, but I just like I think my component looks a little better when its background color matches the background color of Dynpro. Now I'm going to enter a special Mxml tag called script, and this is where I can now put a scripting block in here. So this is where I can insert action script commands. And one of the first ones I want to do here is I want to do some import statements. That's where I'm declaring the usage of certain libraries. So I'm importing those libraries. And the main one that I want to do here is the sap.flashisland library. That comes from the SWC that we linked in. This is how we're going to interact with the island capabilities. I also know, because I've been working ahead here, that I'm going to need a couple of other libraries. I'm going to need the collections array collection library. This is how I'm going to pass data from the island, and then an internal table in ABAP gets turned into a 0 to many context node in Dynpro. That context node needs to get bound to something inside of Flex, and sort of the corresponding concept in Flex is a array collection, and that's how we'll receive that data. You'll see that in a second when I declare that, but I need to first import the library that will allow us to declare an array collection. So next I'm going to need graphics.ifill. You'll see this in a second as well. This is how I'm going to declare the fill colors on my bars and my chart. So nothing really related to the library, just normal Flex stuff. And the same thing here with the graphics.solid color. This all has to do with building the chart, building the colors of the chart. Nothing to do with the island itself. Just going to save what I got so far. And I do have an error. Oh, yeah, and it's just because I'm saving at this point, it's letting me know, hey, you told me to call a init app and you haven't coded an init app yet. That's okay, we'll do that in just a second. Now next we want to declare the data that's going to be exposed to and from Dynpro. And actually the Flash Island concept is quite powerful, because it's going to take any public variables, public bindable variables, or public get and set methods, and they'll automatically be exposed to Dynpro. The library that SAP supplies will try to do a name matching, and you'll see that later when we get into Dynpro. On the Dynpro side, we have to specify what's the name of the object in Flex and what's the name of the object in Dynpro, and that matches things up. So for now, if we want to receive some data in, and we do, we need the internal table from ABAP that will be the foundation of our chart. So basically, this table is going to contain three things. It's going to contain a label that tells us what month the particular item of data is for, so a month string, and then we're going to need two numeric values. We're going to pass them as string, two numeric values, one on-time delivery and one roll throughput yield. And so that's what we're going to be charting, some quality metrics. So all we have to do here is use the bindable command to say, okay, this next variable that I'm going to declare is bindable. It's public var, and we're going to name this data source. You can name it whatever you want, and just remember what you name it, because you're going to need these names later when we do the Dynpro side of this. And we just say that's an array collection. So this data source of type array collection, this is now something that's perfectly well designed to accept a one-to-many or a zero-to-many context node. So, in other words, an ABAP internal table. Now, we haven't defined the columns. Data sources in Flex are not exactly like internal tables in ABAP. They're not statically typed. They'll adjust their structure dynamically based upon how they're created. And since this data source will be populated at runtime from whatever gets mapped from Dynpro, we don't really know at design time what the data source structure is. Now, what we can do is we can declare some additional variables that can be filled by Dynpro that will point to the names of the columns inside the data source. So we don't have to do we don't have to know the technical names from Dynpro. These will basically serve as an alias for the columns and the actual column names that Dynpro builds, and then Dynpro can build that alias for us. So from the Flex side, for instance, I'm going to do a public bindable var called month LBL, so month label. It's going to be type string, and regardless of what data type it's actually matching up to, these are always going to be strings because they're just aliases for the column names. So now Dynpro will fill in the actual column name in data source that points to whatever the month label is, whatever we named it in Dynpro. But this month label variable will act as an alias for that. You'll see this a little bit later when we get into the coding where we're processing this data source. We don't have to know the actual name. We can just reference the column dynamically off of the value that's in this month label. So if you're not ABAP programmer, this is very similar to using a field symbol to reference a particular column in an internal table dynamically. And we'll just repeat this process for our other two columns. So bindable public var OTD. Type string, and this is where it's important to remember, like I said, the data type of these are always string. The actual data type that we're passing over is not necessarily string. This is numeric data, but these are just aliases, so these are just going to hold the names of the actual columns, so they remain strings. Alright, now I have a couple of variables that aren't going to be exposed to Dynpro. These are internal ones that we're going to use just inside the processing of Flex. This is my fill object. This is going to be to do a color fill on the columns in my chart. So nothing that you really have to be concerned about from an island standpoint. I'm just going to say this one fill is going to be a new solid color, and I want this one to be color XBCD0DF and solid alpha, and then I declare a different color for my roll throughput yield coloring. Roll throughput yield fill. Oops. I fill. New solid color 0xFFD965. And what I'm doing here is, instead of using the default colors for the chart, I wanted to do some colors that better match the SAP color scheming. So that's why I'm creating these dynamic colors. Now finally we get to the public function for init app. And it has no parameters. Void. So remember, this is the function that will be called on initialization of our component. Now all we have to do here is we want to call the Flash Islands library. So Flash Island dot register. And what do we want to register? We could, if we had a very complex application, we had subcomponents, we could register just part of it with the island, but we want to register our entire component, so I can just say register this. This is the logical reference that means this whole component. So I'm registering the component with the island. That's what's going to expose all these public variables to the island's framework. At this point I can save, and my one error went away because now I have that function declared. Well, that's all the scripting that we need. Now we need to begin to build the layout of our application with a couple of Mxml tags. So the first one I want to do is just a so I want a series slide. So I'm building some animations that will play when the chart is created or when it's changed. So I gotta give these an ID. So slide in. So this is the animation that I want. I want it to slide on creation. So I can set the duration. I want 1 second duration and direction from the right. So that's one of my animations, and my other animation that I want is going to be a zoom. So series zoom ID equals zoom in, duration. So again, I'll do a duration of 1 second, and relative to the chart. And then horizontal focus is left. So that's one of the powerful aspects of Flex, is doing these very rich animations, because the Flex component is actually executing on the desktop. We have the capability to do rich animations, things that just aren't possible in the browser. So that's one of the main reasons for wanting to take advantage of Adobe Flex. Next, we'll build our chart itself. I'm going to do a bar chart. I need to give it an ID. I'm going to call him, very imaginatively, I'm going to call it bar chart. So let's see, XMLNS MX. What type is he? I'm going to say he is clustered bar chart, and I want the width to take up 100% of the component width. Let's see, just a few other housekeeping things to make things nice here. I want to set the font size. I want to make it fairly big. 16. Font weight equals bold. Nice bold font. Font style. Let's get really fancy. Make it italic. And then show data tips. Yes, we want to show the data tips, so that when you mouse over a series, a particular item in the series, you'll get more details about it. Now you notice it inserted my end bar chart. Now I need to insert some things within the bar chart that further define it. Basically, I need to tell it what to put on the vertical axis. So vertical axis will be a category axis. So the category field, this is where we just tell it what field we want. This is, we're going to say month LBL. So our alias, and notice we're putting it in these curly brackets. That means that it's bound to this item. It's not a direct reference. So we're saying, okay, the field is going to be whatever value the name of the field will be filled dynamically from whatever value is in this variable. So that's the field, and then we tell it the data provider will be our bound to our data source. So anytime anything changes in the data source, it'll be reflected automatically in the chart. So that's our vertical axis. Now we need so that's going to tell us month, June, July, August on our axis. Next, we need to build our series. Next. Series. Oops. Close my brackets. There we are. And in the series, so I need I need a bar series, and the X field will be supplied dynamically by the OTD alias. Display name. Now I'm going to hard code the name inside the Flex component. This is probably something that you want to pass over from Dynpro as well in a real application, because you'd probably want those to be language dependent. So you'd want to be able to translate them inside of Dynpro. You'd want them to switch automatically depending upon what logon language you're in Dynpro. So probably not the best idea to hard code them over here, but for the simplicity of this first exercise, I am going to just go ahead and hard code them. So we data bind our data provider to our data source as well. And this is where we can specify the color, because I can say fill equals my OTD fill. So that means it's going to get its color dynamically from this variable here. And I need to put you in quotes. OTD fill. And now we can say show data effect. So what animation do we want to play on show? Well, we want it to be our slide in animation. Alright. So that's one of our series, our on-time delivery. Now we need a second series for our bar chart. So bar series, very similar X field. Now instead of OTD, it would be our RTY column. Display name, RTY. Data providers, also data source. Fill equals the RTY fill. The show data effect. And now he will have the zoom in effect. And that's it for him. So we've built our series, our axis. We have our bar chart. Our bar chart's really done. The only other thing that we want to do in our application is we want to add a legend. This is really optional, but we'll go ahead and throw it in. And this is nice because we can just tie the legend to the same data source, and it will get its information automatically from the data source. Direction horizontal. And that's it. We can see already, I'll go ahead and save it here. I got no errors. You can see the outline of our application and navigate to particular elements from there. We can also see it forming a little bit at design time. Obviously the data is sort of dummy data, and because we're using that fill dynamically to specify our colors, these aren't going to be the colors of our chart. So our Adobe Flex component is really basically done at this point. We've got all the coding we need in it. You've seen everything that we need to turn it into an island. Actually, as we've been been saving it as we go along, it's been constantly building the output, the islands intro.swf, a debug version. If you wanted a non-debug version, then you could come in here and choose Project Export Release Build, and it would ask us where we want to save it. I give it the same name. I'd say, all right, put it in my bin release. You would then have your choice. When you use this in Dynpro, you could choose to use the release build, or you could upload a debug version. You could give the debug version a different name, a -debug, and then depending upon a flag inside of Dynpro, you could upload them both into your Dynpro project, and it would call one or the other dynamically. I'm going to go ahead and assume that I don't have any bugs in my application, mainly because I've built this before, and I sure hope it turns out okay again. And I'm just going to go ahead and use the release version. So this islands intro 1.swf. It's been built, so it's sitting out on my file system on my PC. It's ready to be integrated into Dynpro. At this point, we'll switch over to the ABAP workbench, and we'll begin to build the Dynpro half of our application. All right, now we're ready to integrate the Flex component into our Dynpro application. I'm going to return to the Dynpro environment. Go back to the repository browser. And I've got a package here where I put all this stuff in. So I want to start by creating a new Dynpro component. I'll call this ZISL. I named my Flex component Intro 1, so just to keep things simple, I'll name this Intro 1 as well. So Intro number 1, and I can create my initial window and my initial view. And there we have our link into a transport request. All right, nothing really different that you have to do at the component level. We'll go down to the component controller. And this is pretty normal stuff. We just need to model our context that we're going to want to bind to the Flash Island. We're actually going to design a context that can be bound to both the island and to a normal Dynpro UI element. We're going to take the same data and we're going to display it in a table and let users edit that, and then we'll show them a chart of that data below, and as they change the data in the table, we'll be able to see the chart rebuild with the nice little animation that we have. So I want to create a node. Oh, helps if I'm in change mode. So I want to create a node, and I'm going to call this report data. Very fancy there. I'm going to say that it is a 0 to many. And I'm not going to go off of a data dictionary structure, actually. So then I want to create an attribute called month. And it's just a string. And then I need another attribute called OTD for my on-time delivery, and it's going to be type I, so it's an integer. And then the same thing with RTY, roll throughput yield, is going to be type I integer. So we've got this at the component controller. The other thing we want to do here is we'll go into the initialization, and I'm actually, this is not the world's most impressive functionality because, quite frankly, I'm going to I'm just going to hard code some data. I'm going to first use the wizard to say I want to populate. So I'm going to set the report data node as table operation. So it's going to generate some nice code stubs for me here. Now all we have to do is fill in the logic to actually fill this internal table. It's declared an internal table for us called LT report data. And this is where I said I'm just going to hard code it, and you don't want to watch me type this either, so I'm going to cut and paste it from something I already had prepared. You can see here. Alright, so we're just going to hard code 3 records into the internal table for July, August, September, and we totally are making up some numbers for on-time delivery and roll throughput yield. So yeah, just to keep this example very simplistic. I'll go ahead and save and activate what I've got so far. Alright, we're now ready to start building our user interface on the Web Dynpro side, so I'll go into the view. We'll have a nice empty view to start. Alright, so I go to my context. The first thing I need to do is map over my component controller context to my local view. That's good. Complicated there. I'll come in, and remember I said I want a table at the top that the user can edit the data, and then I want to show the flex component chart below that. So I'm going to start by creating a table that I'm going to name table. Feeling really inventive here with my names today. Quality data. I have to get fancy. I come to my table itself, make this just a little bit bigger, actually, and I can say I want to create binding on my table, and then come here. I want to create binding off of view. Now, actually, I want the user to be able to update, so I don't want this to be a text view. I want the on-time delivery and the roll throughput yield to be input fields. All right, and that's basically built our table up. The only other thing that I want to do here is I want to put an event on enter, so if the user changes the data, they can just hit enter in that field, and the chart will redraw. And we don't actually need any logic here. I can just say on action. Okay, I can't name it on action. That generated the ABAP event handler. We don't actually need anything in this event handler. We just want something to throw a server event so that the context changes will occur, and then those changes will automatically be pushed into the Flash Island. You can see all that happens actually without a single line of code. We want the same thing on the roll throughput yield, but now I've already generated my action. I can just reuse that one. Save that. Now what else do I need besides a table? I can't just directly insert the Flash Island UI element. The Flash Island UI element is special in that it always has to be the root node of a view. So you'll see in a second we'll do a swap on this root UI element container in another view. But for now what we have to do, kind of the same way that you insert ALVs, select options. We're just going to insert a view container. So we're going to say islands container. We're just going to insert a view container UI element as a placeholder for our islands view. All right, next we'll create the view to hold our Flash island itself. I'll create a new view. You can name it whatever you want. I'll give it a name so we know that it holds the island. Okay, the first thing we're going to need to do is put in the Flash Island UI element. And this is a new aspect of Dynpro in Enhancement Package 1, is that we can do the swap root element. And when I do the drop-down, you see a very different set of UI elements, some that aren't available in the normal UI element space. They're not available in the toolbar for drag and drop onto the canvas. And one of these is the Flash Island. And that's what we want to insert. So now we have the root is our Flash Island. We'll go ahead and give it the actual dimensions. If you remember when we were doing our component, we told it 100% by 100%. Now we're telling it how much canvas space on the screen we actually want to reserve, and then the component will expand to fill that. Now, we need in this SWF file to give it the name of the compiled SWF that came out of our project build. And what we do to make the lifecycle management of the object very simple is we need to import this from our PC where we did the build and import it into the MIME repository. And it will get inserted into the transport request and moved along with the rest of our development. So now I just need to go out and find my workspace. So this is my Netweaver Developer Studio workspace, so all my project folders are in here. So I go to Islands Intro 1, I go to bin release, and there's my Islands Intro 1.swf. And that's the only thing that I need to upload. I don't need the HTML or the JavaScript, the whole test frame that was implemented around it. I only need the SWF itself. So we'll keep the name the same. Get saved. We can then see it in our MIME repository, and I can come over here and I just need to fill in that name. Islands intro 1.swf. There it is, bindable, so you can supply the name dynamically at runtime if you need to. Alright, so that's now we got the island inserted. Now we need to put some data in it. So I'll bring across the data from my component controller. So now the one context that's shared between the two views. Now we're going to extend that to the island. The first thing we need to do is to insert a data source. So a data source is a way of saying I need to map a one-to-many, or a one-to-many, a zero-to-many, or a one-to-one, or a 0-to-1 context node, and I want to match that up to a data source, or array collection in our case, on the Flex side of the world. And as I mentioned earlier, all this really involves is doing a name mapping. We have to say, okay, the name is, what is the name of the field inside Flex? So what did we name it in our bindable variable? So we named that one data source. And then what do you actually want to bind it to inside Dynpro? We want to bind it to report data. And that's really it. Now we do have to do the name mapping on the columns. So this is where we're populating the aliases. We do that by just saying insert property. Insert property. And we can say So it was named month LBL, and these are case sensitive. So that was the name of it inside of Flash Island, and then we can say what is the name of it inside Dynpro. It's called month. And that way the two are independent. I could rename my context and I wouldn't break the coding inside the Flash Island. It would adjust automatically because it's going to use the alias to point to the actual Dynpro name. Now we have this read-only flag. We're basically saying we leave that checked that the data can't be changed inside the Flash Island. We can only push data changes to it. Some later examples in the e-learning series, we'll see how we uncheck this and then how we can push data back from the Flash Island back into the Dynpro context. But for now, we'll keep things quite simple. And we just need to map our other two columns. So property, OTD, we'll map U to OTD, and one more. And this is our raw throughput yield, so RTY and RTY. We'll save that, and we're just about done. Alright, nearly done. Just the last little bit of housekeeping that we need to do. I'll bring up the window, and we'll see our island container. We need to embed the island inside the island container. So just drag and drop to that. So now our island view is embedded inside the island container. We need to save and activate everything we've done so far. I can then create an application so that we can test this. And we are now ready to test our application. Alright, all done now. We're ready to execute our application. It comes up. There we are. You'll notice right away we got our normal Dynpro area, and we've got our Flash Player area running within Dynpro. The data is shared between the two areas. You can see that on our on the tooltip. The data is flowing between the two areas. If I make a change here, let's say I change him from 94%. If I change him to 10%, hit enter. The chart redraws with the new data. We get our animation, basically everything that we set out to do. And one last item. Before we ran the islands component kind of isolated, but I do want to show you it running here inside of a larger, more realistic scenario. So now we're inside a business partner maintenance transaction, so we can look up our business partner, and now we'll see the raw throughput yield and the on-time delivery for a particular vendor. So we'll look up SAP as our vendor, and now when we go, you can view other data about the partner, but you can go to the reports tab, and then you would see the same data displayed, and we have the same sort of interactive capabilities now. While we're in here in this more realistic application, I do want to show you some debugging techniques. First of all, if I right mouse click and I can choose copy log to clipboard. Now, so that's in my clipboard. I can then open up WordPad, Notepad, any type of text editor. I usually just because Outlook's always running for me, I usually just pop up an empty email and I do a paste into here. And now what you see is the entire processing log for the island area. So if you're having some problems, an area is not updating, this is a great place to start looking. You can see how are my data bindings working, what here's the property name in the data source. Here's my alias name. What was it actually bound to? What was the name from WebDynpro? So there you see the long full name that we're avoiding by using the alias. So you can see that all your data mapping was good. You can see that an event occurred, and then what data was passed. So you can go through here. Like I said, this is a great little debugging tool. Now, by the same token, this shows you the log of what's going on. You may want to see the data itself that's moving back and forth. So we also have the copy source to clipboard. Now that's not the code source, it's the source of the data that's moving back and forth. So this is an XBCML document. This is how WebDynpro communicates with the island. This is basically how the island's framework works. It takes the WebDynpro specific data and it formats it in XML. So it's no longer specific to ABAP or Java, and it sends this XML document via the HTTP response object. It's embedded in the HTML document. And then the Islands framework extracts this XML document and parses it. This is also how we're able to expand and change the Island framework over time, include other technologies. It's because we built this XML neutral format. And WebDynpro doesn't actually have to know anything about Flash Islands. We're just building this XML, and the same way the Flash Island has to know very little about the way WebDynpro works. It just has to know how to process this XML. That's also how we can get the same processing out of WebDynpro Java and WebDynpro ABAP. They can use the exact same island component. We don't have to build different islands for the different flavors of WebDynpro.